When you are. All right, good evening. Welcome to the October 7th session of the Danvers School Committee meeting. I'd like to start with a call to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'll start with the Danvers Public School mission statement. Danvers Public Schools is a dynamic community of independent learners dedicated to respect, responsibility, creativity, and the pursuit of academic and personal excellence. This meeting is being broadcast on Danvers Community Access Television. Is there anyone in the audience that's recording? No one seems to be recording. Okay. And we'll go right over to the agenda, and we'll start with the items of interest from the superintendent.
I'll just pass until we get to my update.
Okay.
Sorry, new button. I'll pass till we get to my update. Thank you.
Okay. Any items of interest from the school committee?
Yeah, I'd like to personally send out a congratulations to a good friend of mine, a gentleman that I coached soccer with at Danvers High School for 19 years, Mr. Jimmy Hinchin. He's the gym teacher at Highland School as well, and we run the summer rec programs, the parks together. And he just won his 400th career game as a coach. There really isn't a better guy in town to celebrate besides Jimmy. You know, he's salt of the earth, and his coaching staff, Ashley Taylor and Sean Hills, they're all unbelievable. So it's a great group of people, great group of kids. So I want to throw that out there.
Okay, I'd just like to acknowledge an HRMS teacher, John Hodson. He's a 6th grade science teacher at Holton Richmond Middle School, and he spent more than 2 weeks in Ghana through the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms program. He recently organized a drive to donate trees for Ghana Village. HRMS donated over $500 to plant trees in Ghana. So thank you very much, Mr. Hodson, and to HRMS and the entire community. And last but not least on my list is Danvers High School National Art Honor Society and Danvers High School art teacher Jeff Surrett. He created and presented a mural to Smith School that was commissioned by the Smith PAC. And it looks like it's a Bulldog Brave piece of work there. So thank you very much for that, acknowledging the folks. Okay, and you ready, Mr. Brown? Or hold comment? Oh, any comments from the community? And when you come up, please state your name.
Okay, red is a yeah. Jenny Corsino, good evening. I'm mother of a 7-year-old at Thorpe School, and I just had a question about the audit report, when it would be available for parents to review, and when it is, would we be able to also have that on the next school committee's meetings for public parents to come up and make comment or ask questions? That was really my only question that I wanted to put out there.
It will be available once we present tonight. We'll put it on the webpage.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, because I saw that it was a hyperlink in the meeting for tonight, but we can't get into the PDF. So
it'll be available in its entirety.
Perfect. Yep. Appreciate it. And is there going to be an option to discuss at the next school committee meeting if parents have any questions or comments? Not discuss, but the
Right.
public comment availability.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
The next meeting is November 14th, 6:30 p.m.
Perfect.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Just
No
requesting for it to be an item. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the community? Okay. Wow.
All right, thank you very much. We'll head into our update. First off, we have our student representatives report, our certificate of academic excellence, the enrollment report. I'll present my professional practice goals, subcommittee policy meeting, a recap from that, and then we'll have a discussion about and a presentation of the district threat assessment team. So without further ado, we have Julie and Olivia here to present information. Here we go.
Hi. So last week, DHS continued to host the Student Activities Fair during the community block for all grades. Students were able to see co-curriculars the school has to offer and representatives from all DHS clubs and organizations set up informational tables for students to pursue and ask questions. We encourage all students to get involved with a club, organization, or support anything that they are passionate about. Additionally, we launched over 20 passion projects that students can opt out into signing up for. Passion projects meet once a cycle on E-days during community block time, and students have the opportunity to partake in specific passion projects and activities if they're interested in the topics being offered. And this is a great way for students to connect with other adults and students in the building that share similar interests.
So this month, actually, we're holding a college and career day. It's going to be Thursday, October 24th. It's going to be, every student is going to be participating in something. For our ninth graders, they're going to be participating in some activities that's going to continue to acclimatate themselves as members of the community. So like community building activities, my career and academic plan lessons, and they're going to be introduced to Win Block, which is something we hold during community blocks, just to teach them new ways to like organize and be a student at the high school. For our sophomores and juniors, they will be taking the PSAT, so the preliminary SAT on the practice. So much fun. And finally, our seniors, me, our school's organizing a bunch of like college visits to the school to have people like meet them and like talk about college and what they're looking for in that application, things like that. But also, if a student wants to go on an individual tour, they're able to go out, get it signed off, and just go visit a school for the day. So yeah, a really important day upcoming end of the month. Yeah.
And then for our DHS Acts theater updates, the Mean Girls is the school musical this year, and it will be showing on November 21st through the 23rd. And we hope that the members of the school and Danvers community will come out to see these performances. Last week, students involved in DHS Acts had a table during lunch promoting the show, and students and teachers who donated $1 could write an encouraging message in the Kind book. And it's our version of the burn book from the movie and the show. And they could also take a picture with the Polaroid camera and put it in the book. And the money raised will be donated to the NAN Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to spreading awareness of teen depression and suicide within the schools.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Yep. When is the performance again, Mean Girls? All right, I'm sure that I'll get information to put out in my update for that. Awesome, thank you. All right, next up is the Massachusetts Association of Secondary School Superintendents, Certificate of Academic Excellence. I'm going to ask Principal Demaro to come forward, but the award itself, the Certificate of Academic Excellence, it's an annual award that recognizes high school seniors for their academic achievement, community contributions, and this year we're very pleased. Darius Chung from the high school, and Darius, if you could come up and stand next to Demaro, and he has some comments to talk about you and your great accomplishments, and then once that's done, we'd love to have Darius' family come up for a couple of pictures too, and thank you for being here.
So just for a little context, the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents has designed an award for academic excellence, and these awards are given to high school students who have distinguished themselves in the pursuit of excellence during their high school careers. It's also intentionally designed to make the presentations at the start of the year to allow for the inclusion of this unique citation in his credential package and counselor recommendation for all applications. So we are pleased to award the Mass Certificate of Excellence to DHS Senior Darius Chung. Throughout his time at Danvers High, Darius has continued to demonstrate achievement and excellence in his classes and has made positive contributions to the DHS community at large. Darius is one of the highest achieving students in the senior class and is currently in the top 5% of the class of 2025. He participates in a variety of activities and organizations in and outside of DHS, including soccer, Swim, Latin Club, World Language Honor Society, Next Gen, and Student Council. He's also the vice president of the class of 2025. He's also earned recognition with several awards and honors at past DHS academic recognition nights the past 3 years. Darius is also a member of the National Honor Society, and as part of his teacher recommendation, our business teacher, Ms. Bollier, stated that Darius is an amazing young man. He is incredibly intelligent, hardworking, and motivated. He is dedicated to his studies and all that he does. He is a leader among his peers. He is kind and compassionate. We're proud of Darius and his accomplishments and look forward to continuing to support him during the remainder of the senior year. Congratulations again for this well-earned recognition.
Congratulations. Thank you. That's quite a list of honors. How do you keep everything straight? I manage. You manage? Yeah. Well, love to get a quick picture if that's okay. Sure. Parents? Come on. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Moving on, we have our October 1st enrollment report. And the enrollment report is done, we report to the state every year on the 1st. All districts throughout the Commonwealth report this out. And this is important because this locks in the year and connected with Chapter 70 funding and everything that's important to a school district. So I thought for context, I would put the 2024 enrollment, which is the top column, and I put together just the enrollment, the difference from last year, 2023, as well as our K-5, our elementary, Holton Richmond, and DHS. And, you know, there's a little bit of a variability, not a whole lot. We held steady at the K-5, gained a little bit at Holton Richmond, and a little dip at the high school. But all in all, we're not too far off. And you can see for context with 2022, we're still above that level in some areas. So I think, you know, at the end of the day, our numbers are holding steady with enrollment, which I think is encouraging. We know across the nation, the demographics are shifting the demographics are going down in terms of enrollments across the country. Primarily, I think it's grade 5, 4, and 5 moving up. But overall, I think our numbers are steady and strong. And, you know, last year we had a pretty big senior class and a smaller freshman class. So those things weigh in. So I think you can show overall stability that's through our district. And again, I thought it was good to compare our numbers across the board. And I didn't go back to 2021 and 20, you know, with COVID years, but thought I'd bring that for comparison. So I don't know if the school committee has any comments. The full report is in your folder that breaks it down by the schools too.
And what year does the Essex Tech start pulling in? Is it 6th grade or?
No, they're freshmen.
Freshman, okay.
Yep. And I can bring a more, oh, go ahead, sorry, Mr. Shannon.
Through the chair to the superintendent, those numbers are all based on the October 1 date. Do we see typically a change in those numbers when we get to the end of the year? Do we gain from charter schools or private schools throughout the year?
Not a huge movement on either side. We did notice, we saw, actually the last week before school began, we saw an uptick in some enrollments. But overall, it's fairly steady throughout the year. And if it's okay through the chair, you know, I'm happy to provide a more analysis in the November meeting because we do studies of retention and we also look at that change over the transition from 5th to 6th and 8th to 9th. And I'm happy to provide more detailed information for you if you'd like in the November meeting.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. I do notice like a 50% drop from 5th grade, and what's the main driver behind that? But I know we made a lot of changes as well, so hopefully that'll right itself.
It does, and certainly looking at, and I know that Principal Colantoni and the high school They do like an exit survey as well, and we look at that information, families that have left the district for whatever reason it is, and we look at that data, and I can bring some updates with that as well.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is the, did I have this backwards? I might have on my agenda. I just pushed it too fast, sorry. For my professional practice goals for this year, just kept it very simple with 3 main goals. Number 1 is student achievement, and we've met with all of our administrators, and we're looking to align our goal of student achievement to the district improvement as well as school improvement. And the difference for me than last year was more of just learning about the district and diving in and my entry plan, but this year really diving into student achievement, and I really believe on my end, looking at key action steps and benchmarks, working directly with the principals, curriculum directors to ensure they're staying on track with the school improvement plans, looking at assessment data with them, working with Mary in the curriculum department as well. I believe the thing that I need to do is to review all the systems of supports that drive this work, right? And they're doing the work on the ground, and my job is to really look and see areas that could use adjustments, improvement, and work on that piece. So that really is a big part of my action steps for this goal, which is working and strengthening our Tier 1 instruction, which is critical across all levels, working directly with the principals and directors for their current structures that support student achievement, make sure they're in alignment, as well as my regular meetings with the principals and directors just to assess their improvement, and as well as working with Mary just to ensure the new curriculum is going through and all those check guards. And so I made that a broader piece. That was a recommendation from my evaluation last year. But year 2 is really the time to dive into the systems, and I think the timing is great with that. So that's for goal 1. Goal 2 is alignment of district practices. Again, this has really come out of our work and realizing, across not only with the central office leadership team, but dealing with the schools and looking at a number of our practices that are there and ensuring that our practices are solid. They're there for stability as well as sustainability over time. And we've been working on things that even from the last year that we've brought some changes in and making sure that they're embedded in practices that continue to move forward. So this is a goal that, I think our administrative team is there. They've heard us talk about this and really looking to lead the work at the top on the way down to analyze and provide more accountability for our protocols and policies, which I think is critical. We've already done that dive into the work last year. Now it's really an opportunity to really dive in to look, and it parallels the first goal in terms of structures and strategies. So that piece is important. Also developing the Student Advisory Council as well as another offshoot to have some dialogue with other stakeholders that I think is key as well. And then goal number 3 is the strategic plan, which is pretty cut and dry, but we've established our steering committee. We're working on the strategies for the focus groups. We're looking to organize focus groups. We have 2 dates in November. We'll be working with our faculty as well as the community. Trying to work on a time with the school committee. I'd love for you to be a focus group, as well as other community entities throughout the time. So the idea is by the beginning of January to have our data, to create the vision that will then guide our work into creating our strategic plan, but then really action steps for each year that are aligned with the themes that come out of our visioning. But the second part of this is creating our district vision of the graduate. So ensuring that that's aligned, and that's a K-12 initiative, actually pre-K-12 initiative, that ideally we can create this vision. And a lot of work has been done previously, and now it's bringing it together. So then once this is developed, stepping back in the next couple of years to really diving in and aligning that with our practices as well. What do we want our graduates' skills to have to be successful in today's world, right? And things have changed even from the last strategic plan and even back from when we went to school. What skills are important for our students to have to be successful? And that's all relative, right? Obviously, we're going to talk MCAS and other data points, but we know there's a lot of other things that we work with our students to improve so they have the skills to be successful in an ever-changing global economy. So those are my 3 goals. I'm excited about them. I've worked with our principals to set their goals and encouraged them to really stay simple and drive into their improvement plans for alignment. as well as our central cabinet. So I don't know, I did put the full goals in your folder. I don't know if there are any questions that you have. And I will bring a midpoint update, probably January, of where we are on those goals, and then before we get into the end of the year, my evidence support for the evaluation. All right, subcommittee policy meeting we had the 23rd of September. The first policy piece which we talked about, we're fortunate to have acquired 2 vans that we're able to utilize throughout the day for extracurricular transportation, enrichment activities, and they're used a great deal, and that has actually saved us. I know it's saved us a lot of money because that means those are less vehicles that we need to lease for different types of trips. But we really need to have a policy in place that, because these are, as they say, non-7D, which there are less restrictions in terms of this transportation, because the transportation is not done for fixed routes. To do fixed route transportation, you need a 7D license, that is the taking to school and bringing home. But throughout the day and other one-off type trips, that's not required. So it's in our best interest to have a policy, and Josh and Mike attended the meeting, and we got a lot done with that, and I went back to the attorney for one more spin through, because I think our biggest piece is just to ensure that the refinements of the endorsement and record check as such as would be plausible. So I look forward to having that ready to go for our November school committee meeting for first read. And then we did talk a lot about policy ADD, which is Safe Schools Policy, which we're presenting a first read tonight. And that really is to create provisions to support our district threat assessment team, which is important. We already have a policy in place, and there's really no need to create a new policy. It's just to strengthen one area in terms of the safety issues in the middle. And I've shared that information. We'll bring that out later tonight in new business. And then policy JF, which is student admission policy. And this really is looking for an added provision in there, which is for complete records from sending schools, and that is cited with the statute for that, just to ensure that we have full records in terms of our enrollment process, which we do, but it's just another layer of safety so that we can review all the records. We want to get students into school as quickly as we can, but we want to also do it in a way that we have the necessary information, but also work on a nice transition for new students. And a lot of this, for students that come in, to your question, Mike, throughout the year, this, applies for all students coming into the district, but really, when somebody moves into the district, it's important that we take the time to ensure that they, feel comfortable, develop a sense of belonging with families and students, as well as going through this. So we'll have more on that to come. So our next meeting for the policy subcommittee is December 16th. And then last but not least, if I could have Principals Riley and Colantoni come up and Jim Sullivan come up. Would like to present our district threat assessment team, which we've established, and very proud of the work that has taken place. And they're going to present the district threat assessment team, the overview. Just to give a background, last spring, and this was an offshoot of our district safety committee, was looking at ways that we can handle threats that come into our buildings that, again, every threat is deemed credible till proven otherwise. And oftentimes, the say something, see something, say something is really critical. So what happens if a teacher encounters, they hear something came out like, saw this online, or a student reports something, or a parent calls in. So having a team that works together to assist principals and this level of safety and security is needed. Most districts have these, and we're very proud of the work that has been done. So I'm going to turn this over to the team to present, and I will actually, we have some follow-up presentations with our faculty, but we wanted to bring this to school committee first, as well as our the ground worker and ground team, and I will also share this information with the school community, my Friday update. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Bauer. As the superintendent said, we started last year with our initial training through the comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines at the University of Virginia. So we participated in a 2-day training through the University of Virginia to get an overview. And as the superintendent said, team's really to support the administrators in the building to help evaluate the nature of a threat and what appropriate next steps might be. The team's made of our school resource officer. Adam and I are two of the principals. Jim's one of the other administrators on the team as the director of technology. Then we have a school psychologist and 2 adjustment counselors as part of the team that can deploy to any school in the district based on the nature of the threat and the availability of the staff members. Adam, you want to talk a little bit about how it works?
Yeah, sure. I think, the nice part is having the team to call in. It's like a fresh set of eyes to come in who are not intimately involved in the school community, who can come in and kind of ask the right questions. The protocol really has a flow chart, so there's consistency across the district. Really evaluating the threat, not the student, to kind of see what the next steps are. And so I think as an administrator, it's nice if something happened in my building, I could lean on another administrator to come in so we can still make sure the school is functioning well and just have the support of another administrator.
And I think one of the important, a couple of the important highlights. One is the the diverse background of the threat assessment team. So we have a lot of different resources that are available, which is huge. And the other thing that I think is important, particularly to the community, is to understand that we're here to support the administrators and support the processes that are already in place. So it's important that if somebody is concerned or does raise the concern of the possibility of a threat, you're still doing the same thing. You're going to your teacher, you're going to your principal, and you're letting them know that that you're concerned about something, and then we're following up with the stakeholders to make sure that the proper procedures are in place.
And I think one of the the members of the team very thoughtfully done having our resource officer involved, because that's always the first step if anything comes in, just to ensure that everything is safe from a context of any specific violence or anything like that. But more importantly, most of these come in were reports. So the resource officer can also do a lot of background work and work with families, and that's actually tying into the policy update. But having our adjustment counselors and our school psychologists have a deeper level. They have a whole protocol that they work through to assess where things are. And then from there, we have our principals who are helping navigate the whole process. So a lot of work was done last spring. They followed training that took place all last spring, and it was based on a University of Virginia model, which is a solid model that is the model for many district threat assessments teams. I think this is another level, and I'm very proud of the work they're doing. But again, I have to give kudos to the safety committee that a lot of this was talked about last year. So it's another way to improve. And I think Brian or Adam said it, that it's important that when something happens, it doesn't matter the level at the time. We're not here to make judgments. We're here to evaluate and go from there. And when you're a principal in the building, you're running the building, and having a team to rely and work together on is critical, because you want to make sure that you're following procedures and protocol while keeping everybody safe. And then they're able to communicate with me if there's any follow-up emails or such that need to be made. So again, this is really, I think, a great addition to our school safety protocols. So I don't know if there's any questions from the committee.
Just one question, Chair. So this is great, guys. I think this is good, and I actually think it's really good that Jim's part of this team too, just to bring that technology piece into it. But I guess my question is around social media, with that being the biggest issue out there. We sometimes get a heads up, before these things, and some of them are deemed credible and some of them are not. But is there things in place right now that we're starting to screen that out, or is there something that we can be a little bit more proactive with to screen that? Or I know sometimes we get a hold of some things ahead of time and they're either deemed not credible or sometimes they are credible, but is there something in place right now that we're doing to monitor that?
From directly monitoring social media, I don't think there's anything that we have in place other than there's content filters and things like that through the district. Any threat, whether it's verbal, written, communicated from a peer, we kind of address the same way. So if it's through social media, it still has to get to us. I mean, we're not actively looking at social media, but if something's brought to our attention, We reach out a lot of times, you know, it happens overnight or in the middle of the night, and Dan and the police chief are the initial contact points that are able to kind of screen that out overnight.
Got it. And I guess the question's for you, Dan, but
Yes.
is that, do we, some of the ones that we've gotten, are those coming from reports that we're getting from?
Right, so they could come from a report of a parent, for example, that might have overheard or saw something, or another student that reported to an adult. And that's why it's so important to encourage, you know, nothing's too small. And so typically when that happens outside of the school day, you know, our resource officers are right on that, and they'll contact the principal, myself, and then we'll triage in terms of what is needed. And this came up in our school safety presentation. You know, how do you deem credible and such? And as Brian and Adam and Jim said, every threat's credible until proven otherwise. So whether that means going through, my time? I'm ahead of schedule, right? But that's a great question in that a lot of the background work is done. So, you know, the police generally will do the legwork where they'll go specifically to individuals' houses to find out, you know, and have a conversation. And since they're with minors, the parents have to be there. Jim is instrumental here too, because if there's something that's coming through our filters, he's able to grab that. And oftentimes you may find commonalities what we're seeing, things that have circulated from other districts, but the context of it could be different. And again, even though we may have, we saw that, we still have to go through that whole process of tying everything together. And there's also the other piece too of communication where, you know, and these are scary times we live in, right? And certainly it's unsettling to hear this, and the worst is to hear it secondhand and then like, well, what is the school response? So just as we did at Danvers High School and followed through on that, the DTAT wasn't really involved as much on that, although I believe we sent follow-up afterwards so they knew in case the fallout was there. But we were on the phone with Principal DeMauro, the resource officer, the chief, myself, all the way till 11 o'clock at night and making a determination that it clearly was one that was circulated throughout. And then our call at that point was like, do we send communication 11, which we know that's challenging, or first thing in the morning? And, you know, and certainly our resource officers are always there in the buildings anyway, and we provided that information. So the DTAT is really good to know, because then you just don't know if any students, faculty, you know, anything can trigger, right? So no matter what, if it's vetted out, it's not credible, you still don't know the impact it may have on individuals at any level, and that's scary. So it's important that they're available, because you never know if, you know, students are upset by this or staff is upset by this, and certainly families too. So, but it's been it makes me as superintendent, it's another level of having built in a team to work. As principals, they now have another group that they can work with too.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay, on to unfinished business. The superintendent recommends adopting policy AC and rescinding existing policies ACAB, ACC, and ACE for a second reading vote. This is the second reading, yeah, okay, just making sure. All right, do I have a second? Any discussion? No discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yeah, we gotta get to the buttons. Opposed, none? Motion carries.
Thank you. And I'll make sure that is adjusted, and we'll update our committee handbook on that one. Thank you.
All right. Next up is the school committee protocols, coming up for a vote. I believe this is the second and final reading, correct? Yes, because it's not highlighted there. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
It's like Jeopardy.
There we go. I second it.
All right, any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion to amend
Okay, go ahead.
under public comment. there's that bullet that says, sorry, under public comment. So I would move to amend the bullet under agendas, which reads, school committee members should not respond to public comments as it is not a back and forth discussion, to add the word typically between the words members and should. So it would now read, school committee members typically should not respond to public comments as it is not a back and forth discussion.
Thank you. I think we're having a version control issue with this because the version was, it's, the latest version does have that in there. That was for your comment was from last meeting, and I did add it, but it does say typically in the newest one.
Is that the only item that we wanted to amend? Anyone else? No other comments? All right, all those in favor of voting on the amended version?
Aye.
Opposed, none, the motion carries.
Great, and I'll add that as well to the website, and may add a blurb into my update as well to that link.
Okay. Item number C, appointment of delegate and alternate to the MASC annual business meeting. I am still on the fence for this meeting. Wondering if we have anyone who could be a delegate. Do we have the dates on that for the MASC meeting? Yeah. So right now Dan's going and I'm possible.
Yeah, just keep me posted and
Right.
we'll
We'll
make a
table this
reservation.
and, yeah, all right, we'll just table this for now and then circle back to it, but I might have a conflict, but I'm doing my best to make sure that I go. Okay. And then subcommittee liaisons for 24-25. We do have an updated list. I'm actually gonna have to read those from the previous notes. Okay, for the subcommittees, CPAC, we have Mr. Sean Doherty. Danvers Cares, we have Mike Shannon. For DEEP, we have Eric Crane. Safety will be a rotating committee. HRIC, which is now one attendee every quarter, will be Eric Crane, and I'm happy to be an alternate if Eric cannot make it. And policy will be Sean Doherty and Eric Crane. That's accurate, Sean? Am I reading that correctly? Okay.
Mr. Chair, I believe it's myself and Mr. Shannon on that one. Oh, we changed it?
This is what we did.
Yeah.
So I have my notes from the, our summer retreat where, just so everybody else is aware, where I had written all this down and it was unfound, but I had it in my bag. So this is, we can make changes to that if we're.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
it could be fluid, but we went back to the one, you weren't here for that, no worries, about it, no worries. Negotiation will continue to be Eric Crane and Josh Kepnes. And there's one more. Curriculum will be Mike Shannon and myself, Gabe Lopes. Did I leave anything? All right, I
Did
think.
you have equity?
Oh, equity and curriculum are now separate. Equity will do rotating as well. That's not called out on our list yet, but we'll circle back to that. Okay, we ready to move on to new business? Any comments?
One quick.
Yep, sure. Go, yeah, Mike?
Right after deep and before policy, you had mentioned I was on the committee, and with my bad hearing, I didn't catch it.
Human Rights and Inclusion
HRIC,
Committee. Yep,
okay.
which is
Got it.
now quarterly, and I said I'd be an alternate for you.
Thank you,
No problem.
appreciate it.
Okay. On to new business. We have a monthly budget report for the September final budget, and Pam will join us. And Pam, you'll have to hit the on button there to speak. There you go. Thank you.
Good evening, thank you. So I provided for you two budget reports. One was the final budget report for FY24 that represented the closeout of last fiscal year. As we had gone through the year, we had seen that we were going to have some deficits, some overages that we needed to account for, and we were able to close those gaps at closeout, leaning somewhat on the ESSER funding that remained, somewhat on the Circuit Breaker Reserve Fund as expected, and also some of the state reimbursement money that has come in for prior year homeless transportation and this year's emergency assistance students. And then the first budget report for the fiscal year 25 is through the month of September. We do have a couple of, I guess with both budget reports, we had some kind of extraordinary challenges in that the town and district have changed over to a new accounting system as of July 1st. So there was a pause in all processing of invoice payments and everything. So we did have to carry over FY24 funds more than we normally would, and that's reflected as in a larger number on that column in the FY24 final report. And then for the new year, it's kind of merging data from the two systems in order to produce this, because payroll is still happening in the old system. The other thing I would note about the FY25 report is that we have our big federal grants that are still pending with DESE. We do not have those budgets yet approved. So there will be some adjustments that I hope to bring to you in November that will kind of take into account some of the shifts that we may decide to make between what is charged to the operating budget versus what is charged to the some of the grants, in order to maximize the use of those grants. Sometimes it behooves us to take a look at how that's being managed. Let me know if you have any questions.
I'm sorry, just trying to
It's a
put
lot
together.
of numbers, it's okay.
Yeah, no, it not so much with a lot of numbers, but you said that final fiscal year 24 is also part of the fiscal 25 September because of the new accounting system?
No, I was just pointing out that on the final FY24 report, there's the second column is encumbered and carryover, and that is a reflection of either purchase orders that were still open where we hadn't had a chance to process the invoices yet, or invoices that we were waiting on that for which there wasn't a purchase order. So we have to let the town know a tally of FY24 expenses that we expect to have to pay after July 1st, and they hold that money aside because we can't use FY25 money to pay those FY24 expenses.
All right, thank you for that clarification. I was just
Sure.
trying to reconcile that. Any questions on the budget?
I want to thank Pam for taking my phone call today and explaining to me what encumbered and carryover means, because I'm just not great. I'm not an accountant, so I thank you for straightening that out for me.
My pleasure.
All right, thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
Okay, and now on to our guest for the Special Education Audit Report to the School Committee. And Mr. Bauer, if you want to introduce him. Yeah.
Yes, through the chair, please. Yes, we have our auditors are here, Mr. Lupini, Dr. Lupini, and Dr. Daymore, senior consultants from Rebus Associates. If they can come up to the podium, we have it set up. I have the presentation. It's the old-fashioned, you tell me to click and I will turn the slides. But I do want to provide some background before we begin, if that's okay, Chair. This audit actually began at the end of last year, and we feel it's critical that we really need to dig into our special education programming, and we certainly heard you know, the many concerns across the district in terms of our delivery of services to students and families, and we also heard from a lot of our staff as well. So navigating this as a first-year superintendent, knowing that we need to address a number of issues to improve our services, and honestly, our team, they work really hard. There's no question about it, but you know, we know that there are areas that we need to address. So the audit is a great tool. They interviewed a number of different stakeholders that are represented in this report itself, and really looking, we feel this report's it's a great opportunity to really identify existing challenges, but also help look at a way, and this is prime time for us with strategic planning and looking as we built plans last year to improve our programming to reduce out-of-district placements. So this comes at a really, really good time, and really I felt it was our responsibility to do a thorough review and audit so we can really build and move forward. There are a number of recommendations that are in this audit. Some of them are non-fund related that just require us looking at our practice and protocols and procedures. Some of it is fund related, but knowing that, you know, we can't do everything overnight, and we really appreciate the support from the school committee as well as the town for our educational programming in district, but we know that it's our responsibility to ensure that when we put programming together, that we are as responsible as possible because every dollar counts. But also the opportunities for all of our students and families, you know, we can't wait either. So it's a piece we're working together. And I think the other piece at the very end is that, you know, looking at the data and following through, and we will release a copy, we'll share a copy with all stakeholders. Of course, we will do that, and we'll be following with some of our team tomorrow. But again, I have to say that a lot of the work that will be pointed out has begun. And we didn't want to wait, I didn't want to wait as superintendent. A lot of things did take place last year, and again, some great support, but we know that we have more work to do. So again, I don't want to negate the work that has been happening. In fact, it's been really good work that has been happening, but we know that there's more that we need to do. So we felt it was a great time, and working with Bill and Cindy, they're just outstanding, and they've worked with us after the report, through the drafts, through revisions. Mary, myself, Christine, and her team, we've looked just to ensure that the recommendations that are there are accurate, and ensuring, you know, we want to make sure everything is out there because it's important that we're as transparent as possible, but more importantly, it gives us a roadmap to build for the future. So with that being said, I will turn this over to Bill and Cindy. Thank you.
What was that second slide, I think? Second slide.
Yes.
You now have a second job.
There you go.
Dan.
Thank you.
So we are both retired superintendents.
Just lower the mic so we can, thank you.
Is that my short joke game? So we are both retired superintendents, but we come from different backgrounds. I've been a general ed teacher. I've run an alternative ed program. I've been a team chair, an assistant sped director, an assistant superintendent, and a superintendent. And I've also been the executive director of a collaborative, and I've done an interim as a sped director most recently. So I am grounded in both areas.
It's great to be here with you. Cindy and I have been doing this work through Rebus Associates, which generally does a lot of work in educator evaluation, coaching, those kinds of things, and we both do that work as well. We listed here some of the districts we've worked with, and I'll make a comment on those, or we'll make a comment on those in a second. I come at this as a superintendent for 25 years in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. 18 of those years spent in Beverly and Brookline, so that's the most work. I also had a few years at the tech school here where I got a chance, as Dan knows and your chair knows, to work with your finance committee and all around the issues when I was interim there. And also have experience with a collaborative. I was the interim executive director at Lab Collaborative, which is in the Burlington area, for a year, and then helped them with the search for their new executive director. We created this slide last week. I think we've actually added a district or two to this since, that we're now starting to work with around audits in particular. A number of these are finished, a number of them are in process, and as I said, it's one of the areas, I don't know exactly what this means, but it's one of the areas where we see a lot of movement and a lot of interest from school districts in having us in particular come in and work with them. And I will tell you that in every case, these districts had different needs, right? I mean, I often talk about Belmont because they allow us to. Belmont is a district of about 4,000 kids, and they had over 150 kids in out-of-district placements, which is a significant number that we had not seen before. Is that fair? And they asked us to really look at what was going on in terms of the possibility of building some in-district programs. They had tended to rely on lab quite heavily as a sort of an in-district option, but it's not really an in-district option. And so we were able to do that, and if you called the superintendent, and you certainly can, she would tell you that that report was very instrumental in a successful override this past year, largely to support those kinds of services for their students. And every one of these is a little bit different. I don't know if you want to make a comment on that.
Yeah, so again, as Bill said, when somebody reaches out to us, the first thing we say to them is, what is your need? What is the underlying issue that you're trying to resolve? So everybody has been different. When I was in Norwell, it was mainly about workflow. Mashpee was
very much looking at they had MTSS documents and their curriculum accommodation plan documents, lovely documents on the website, not in place in classrooms, right? Terrific materials. If you looked at their district, you'd say, wow, they really weren't in place. And they had their main basis was a co-teaching model, which was very successful at their middle school and not so successful at their high school, and they were looking for help in reinvigorating that. So it's a little bit different every time. I will say, because we're going to come back to it pretty quickly here, is that we always end up in regular education. We're never brought in to look at regular education. We always end up in regular education because that's the basis we're finding in terms of most of the issues that we encounter, is where things may not be as strong as they could be for the district, which leads to more referrals, which leads to more placements, which leads to more out-of-district placements. All those kinds of things happen as a result of those kinds of regular education interventions not necessarily being in place.
As a former special ed director, I will tell you a conversation that is common among special ed directors is if there are no other systems for support and intervention in a district, special ed becomes a parent's only choice. And it's not necessarily that they want to go down that road, but they want their child to be helped. So if what we do find is if you don't have strong MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, strong 504 practices, or a strong DCAP, a district curriculum accommodation plan, what happens is parents are going to seek out whatever is available to help their children. So often we do come back to building out your other methods of supporting children along with special education.
So the particular purpose here was to look at the current organization. You had a unique set of circumstances when we began talking about this, and that you were going to have some changes in terms of the people in certain positions. Dan was already in the process of looking at some of the positions and what those positions might look like. And so it was a unique opportunity, he thought, and I agree, to sort of look at what was happening, what might be possible in the future, to look at that organization and programming so that we could address current concerns and implement both short and long-term planning to address district needs. And while we didn't go into the aspects of sort of designing that plan, that has been part of those discussions that the superintendent referred to earlier in terms of how might all of this fit together over time in some sort of a short and long-term plan.
Dan? So this is just the basic methodology that we use in every district. That's just so that you know that what we looked at. We do spend a lot of time interviewing your staff. I think we were here at least 3 days interviewing, plus additional meetings with Dan and Mary, as he referenced. Next slide. And these are just general findings about profile of your district, what your numbers are now. I think the important thing is to see the rise in the number of students in special education. What I will tell you is this rises across the state. For many years, Massachusetts was running around 16–17% average. The state average is now up to 19%. This is a post-COVID situation that we're seeing. So your internal numbers have gone up approximately 50 students. And you have 67 students in out of district, including your collaboratives. So after meeting with Dan a couple of times, we settled on these questions, which you can read yourself. But as you can see, the first question and the last question both turn back to general education. What supports do you have in place for general education to help students before it becomes necessary to refer them to special ed?
So our recommendations fell into these 7 categories. I think it's important to point out something that the superintendent said up front, which is that some of these will require funding, changes in funding. Some not as stark as they might appear in the report or in a first sort of blush. The one I've used as an example out of this report is really the one around splitting the role of school psychologist and team chair, which is not a one-for-one. It's really going to take a good hard look at the data and what kind of psychologist support you might need at each building, and then what the team chair structure. So it isn't we have 6 buildings, therefore we need 6 new positions. That's not necessarily the case. And then there are others that are really more focused around professional development and the kinds of things that you want to make sure that are delivered for all of your teachers, that all of your teachers have as training and as skill sets in terms of supporting students. So we'll start through these, I think is what we'll do, take a look through each of these. And if you have questions along the way, I don't know how you normally operate, we're okay with taking questions as you go.
So there is a commonality among all the districts that we're working with, and even some other districts that are not on this list that Bill and I do other work with. And we are seeing an increase in post-COVID deficits, reading and social, emotional, and behavioral impairments. But as we all know, especially Danvers, where you're located, and I know this has been a problem that you've had before, you're having an uptick in homeless as the motels and hotels are used, or other facilities. But we're all having an uptick in multi-language children as the demographics change. So that's impacting the need for support services as well. Not more importantly, but as importantly, parents that we interviewed, and I will tell you, everybody we interview, we tell them it's confidential, we don't use any names in the report, have indicated that they have out-of-district children that they would love to find a way to keep in-house, to keep in their neighborhood schools, to keep as part of the Danvers Public Schools. So that was a theme that we heard also.
You can go on to the next one, Dan. Thank you.
Any questions about the recommendations? Okay. So again, one of the things that was evident to us is that you did not have a strong data analysis of who was who and who needed what. Christina is already on top of this. We've had some discussions about it. But, you know, when we talk about students with literacy needs, what grade are they at? How far behind are they? Are they behind in phonemic awareness? Are they behind in fluency? That type of deep dive that you need to go into in order to determine what you really need. So that was one recommendation. The second recommendation, we're seeing this again. Social emotional learning is not a special ed specialty. It's the province of all teachers, all administrators, everybody in the schools. So we're suggesting that you rethink those services so that students are getting what they need when they need it. We all know the literature and the news reports about the increase in anxiety among our students. And again, we're going to come back to it again and again, prioritizing the implementation of a robust ESL and MTSS system across all grades.
So the second recommendation deals with regular education interventions and supports. What we found, largely from our interviews and the data that we looked at, is that the DCAP and MTSS protocols and procedures are not used consistently across all buildings and grade spans. Some buildings have stronger systems clearly than others. And those systems need to be consistent, and they need to be strong in all buildings. We saw a practice where sometimes special education IEP teams would transition from a special education eligibility meeting immediately to a 504 accommodation meeting. One of those is special education and the other is regular education, and so there needs to be that's a separate process, and transitioning from one to another is not a good practice. So we recommend ending that practice. And you also, and I know you'll have a comment on this, there was also a practice of using independent tutors without any connection to the MTSS, the IEP, or the 504 process in contractual positions with outsiders. We recommend, if you look at the bottom of the recommendations, a real solid analysis of the number of those contracted tutors, who they're tutoring, how decisions to provide tutoring are made, and how indeed you measure student success. Because otherwise, I mean, in some districts I would stand in front of a group and say, otherwise you have an employment agency for whether they're retired educators or whatever, right? That's not the intent. I know that's not the intent, but there's some feeling that maybe the accountability for what that model is has gotten away from the district.
So when you have a strong MTSS system or well-written IEPs or well-written 504 accommodation plans, there is a way to track student progress. It's very specific. Here is the issue, here is how we're going to address it, here is who's going to address it, here is the timeline for addressing it. And this is how we're going to measure if the student is making progress. Without that system, which the tutoring does not seem to have, I'm sure it's very well-intended people who care about the kids, but you do not have the accountability, as Bill said, to see if children are making progress. Nobody wants their child in tutoring for 5 years at elementary school. There has to be a way to say, this child has done better, or this child actually needs a different service. And if you have no system in place, or you're not using good current systems, this becomes problematic.
So the third area has to do with the team chairperson and leadership structure. In your district, school psychologists double as team chairpersons, including your early childhood director, and we've reserved some comments specific to that position in the report. There's a strong perception that the dual role is difficult and at times a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest comes up often in that I can be the psychologist and have a report to deliver at that meeting, and I'm also chairing the meeting, which by law means I have the authority to commit funds by law. And that's a difficult position to be in. We also heard from many of the people in those roles, and your turnover data in those roles supports this, that many people don't find that to be a role that they signed up for. I think those were the words, actually. They were school psychologists. This role actually got added to their responsibilities. They don't feel that they have the skills, because chairing a meeting is a different set of skills, right? So they don't feel that they have that set of skills. Some of them actually like the team chair role that they find more than they like the work as a school psychologist. But combining the roles is not a great practice. And you've had departures from that role. And you've had departures from that role who have indicated to the district that it's because of the dual role that they were looking to depart. Lastly, your team chairperson roles are Unit A, and therefore do not have supervisory and evaluation responsibilities. And we recommend that team chairs, I think in our implementation as superintendents, we found that having them in that Unit B role, first of all, it helps alleviate some of the supervision and evaluation responsibilities of your other administrators in the building. Second of all, it's a different role to have that person who's chairing that meeting be an administrator. So we recommend that whenever possible, that those roles actually be Unit B or whatever you call your administrative unit.
So, you had one person who liked the role, but I will tell you without going into detail, just talking to this person, you knew the level of skill she had, so she was able to manage it. Your other people that leave, and it's who we're now getting out of the school psychologist program, they're young, they don't have the ability to hold their colleagues accountable, they don't have the ability that when somebody is less than professional at a meeting, they don't have recourse. They were very uncomfortable with being in that position. But beyond that, as Bill said, if they have to assign services to themselves, it becomes almost a conflict of interest. So I'm the school psychologist, a child needs a social skills group. Well, I'm gonna make it 5 times 45, and then I'm gonna end up with less kids on my caseload. I mean, I don't think anybody would do that intentionally, but you could see how that could become a morale problem around staff, that they're assigning to their own services, their own caseload.
And look, there are many different ways to do this. You have a rather unique elementary assistant principal role, right? We're suggesting one way to look at that is that you could have those roles combined and change that role. That could be the team chair role. The one thing we felt pretty strongly about is that in early education, where I believe your person acts as the early education coordinator, the team chair, the school psychologist, and the team chair for that building. Think about that. And the team chair for that building, that's a lot. That's a very difficult role. I think we actually deemed it in the report nearly an impossible role to do well. And it's very clear from our interviews that that person wants to do the job well. And it's a very difficult role because of all the different responsibilities they share in that building.
All right, so continuum of services and special ed programs. Special education has in the regulations some very clear guidelines. You are supposed to go from least restrictive to most restrictive with a whole range in between, okay? Most restrictive being out of district or hospitalized. So, and you're supposed to be able to have programs that children can grow with or rise with. So one of the things that we found is you don't have a continuum of services across all grade spans, and it's not vertically aligned. So there may be strong programs at the elementary, they sort of fade off in the middle. Some of them show up again at the high school. And so for parents, you know, one of the questions we ask is, where is your inflection point where out of district is requested? Well, part of it is when parents don't feel secure that they're going to have a K through probably 22 alignment that their children can continue with, they have to do what's best for their children, all right? And that doesn't mean the programs look exactly the same, because one of the things that is a goal in special education is that children leave us. You know, special educators will tell you their job is to put themselves out of business if they do it right. As kids gain skill and academic knowledge, they hopefully will need less service, more time and inclusion. So your programs do maybe change that and maybe change over time, but there's not enough supports as they get into a more inclusive setting. So if I'm out of my classroom 60% of the time and I've gained the skills I need to now be out of my classroom only 30% of the time, I still may need some supports over here so that I can continue to be in an inclusive setting. And that's not clearly articulated throughout the schools. The other problem that we have is you use the same term for everything that is not inclusion, is not a sub-separate. And it's hard for families to understand, and Mary's looking at me, and because we've discussed it, it's hard for families to understand, well, what's the difference between a learning center twice a week and a learning center 5 times a week? So again, they're not tied to the student's disability, they're not tied to programs, and that works against, first of all, kids, but then also against the district.
Yeah, and I want to say a word about this, the last piece under findings. There's no one right model in terms of locating district-wide programs. You've chosen to move the majority of your programs to the Smith School. In Brookline, when we built programs, we had a set of K-8 schools. We chose a program in each of our buildings. There's no one right answer to that. But each answer comes with things that you must make sure are in place, right? So when you locate a number of programs in one building, and your goal in those programs is around inclusion, now you've added to the caseload of those classroom teachers, right? Because there may be kids with a number of different types of profiles coming into their classroom who need support. So I need, as a classroom teacher, I need professional development, I need support, I need training. Many districts employ, I think we included in the report, put in a building like that, inclusion specialists. Their job is to help those classroom teachers modify what they're doing to meet the needs of all those students, particularly those who may be coming in. That's a very unique and powerful role. So there are lots of things that come with it, and you just need to make sure that you, again, there were disadvantages to that one program in every building that we did as well. But you need to focus on those potential disadvantages and make sure that you program for them. There was one other thing that you talked about that I wanted to say something about. And it had to do with that information. Every parent, and this, I learned this more from being at Lab for a year than I did in Brookline or Beverly. Parents want to know what the future holds for their child, right? And as Cindy said, it doesn't need to be an exact match. In fact, it would be inappropriate if from elementary to middle to high school if it was, because kids change, the programming needs change, but they want to know what that through line looks like. And so we're suggesting here that you need to develop materials that actually define that through line for them so that they feel more comfortable with what the future holds in Danvers for their child. The other thing we talked about down in recommendations below is some potential, just taking a brief look at your data around your out-of-district placements, some opportunities, and I know Christina's already on this, some opportunities potentially to look at for programs that you might have in district which would keep more kids. Not necessarily bring back kids who are already out, that's hard, right? But potentially program for kids who haven't yet left that prevents them from leaving. We were successful. We've both had a lot of experiences with partnering with other agencies. In Brookline, having had that experience in Beverly, I knew the people at Landmark very well. I also knew my parents didn't love the idea of putting their children on buses to go to Landmark every day from Brookline, but they did it because they thought they were getting something very valuable by doing that. We partnered with Landmark to create programming in Brookline, and a number of them said, why should my child go all the way to Beverly every day? You're offering a partnership program here. Can we look at coming back? So there are potential opportunities in those kinds of partnerships, which a lot more districts, right, I'm correct, are doing these days than maybe 10 or 15 years ago. There are a lot of those partnerships that exist.
And to that end, again, referring to our post-COVID challenges, we're recommending that you look to create programs for language-based disabilities K through 8 and for social, emotional, and behavioral challenges at 9 through 12.
Well, I was going to say this is a simple one. So we looked at the number of student support positions that you have in the district. We also didn't see in the district, and spent a lot of time discussing, didn't see a formal process for assigning those people to buildings. There isn't a formal process for requesting and being granted and having a paraprofessional assigned to a building. We're suggesting here that you do an analysis of how and when paraprofessionals are assigned to a school, a classroom, a student, and then ensure that a process exists for the creation of any paraprofessional position. It's an easy category, I speak from experience, it's an easy category to get out of control in terms of have a lack of position control. I've experienced it. And then consider the inflection points at which funds used for instructional assistance could be allocated to teacher or related service positions, because often you can get to the point in looking at the number of paraprofessional positions you have where you end up saying, wouldn't we be more effective in accomplishing what we're trying to do here if we had a teacher, if we had a specialist of some sort? We might be more effective in terms of implementing the goals which drove us to this position in the first place if we did this instead. So understand where those inflection points are.
So as Bill said earlier, and as Dan talked about a little bit, there is nothing, you cannot do this today. First of all, you're in the middle of a budget. But I will tell you, in our meetings with Dan and Mary and Pam and Christina, they've already begun to look at ways they can move some monies around and do some of this. But some of this is quick wins, and some of this is long-term planning. So conducting the data analysis of what you currently have for programs, what your demographic trends are, trying to think about what shape your programs have to take as students are coming in at pre-K, K, and that's something you can do this year. Looking at the number of your paras, you can do that this year in preparation for next year. Setting up the processes you need for hiring paras is an easy one. One of the things we talked about is, I know that Danvers has been very proud to be self-sufficient, but you do have a special ed stabilization fund that I believe you have not tapped. But when I ask, how do you tap it? Nobody seems to know. You know, having clarity around that, because nothing will set you into a deficit faster than 2 out-of-district residential placements at the current cost, all right? And the other thing is that, and we've talked a little bit with Christina about this too, making sure that you have good financial formats and processes for reporting and tracking all special ed costs. It seems that your transportation is over here, your legal's over here, your professional development's over here. Anything and everything associated with special ed should be in the same cost center so that you can really understand what it is costing you. And as you all know, sometimes when you move things around, you have to have them all in one place to know what you're moving between.
Yeah, professional development. So some of this is about systems. So we heard a lot of need for professional learning to address many of these recommendations and other things that we talked about. You have a model that is a very individualized to the educator model. I speak from experience, having had this model when I started in Beverly back in 1997. It's not a model that speaks well to when you need to do professional development around really important topics with everyone or with large groups, where it isn't a choice. It's harder to do. So we talked here about making sure that you have a strong professional development plan where you're laying out these needs over X number of years and making sure you're fitting them into the work that you're doing. The last recommendation, as I said, well, increasing the amount of professional development time we've recommended I don't know of a district where we haven't recommended that. That is an area where in some districts I've seen over the last number of years, professional development time being bargained away. It's not a great place to go for that because it ties your hands when you have important initiatives to put in place. And we also talked about the development of a multi-year and scaffolded PD plan around providing general education teachers with MTSS strategies and supports for them to implement in their classroom.
There will never, ever be enough professional development time. That's the truth. Because as soon as you think you've got it down, you know that the department's going to send down something else. All right. My new IEP. So one of the things that we talk about is assessing where your people are, seeing what skills they have, what knowledge they have, and trying to do, as we say here, scaffolded professional development. Because you certainly also don't want somebody sitting through a professional development they don't need, when you can maybe doing them in a more advanced professional development. So this is one of those things that will take a while to plan and implement. But we came in, we heard Dan talking about his strategy overview. I'm also a NISP coach, so I see Dan once a month. I don't coach him, but we're at the same meetings. And this all ties together with what he is going to be doing for you in terms of a strategy overview. So it will work together, hopefully for your benefit.
Yeah, and Cindy just sort of gave this summary here. I mean, what we've tried to do in the summary section is talk some about that some of this is about positions, and some of it's about looking at things differently, and some of it's about making sure you have plans to put certain things in place. Some of the positions may need to wait, but they may not, and they may not be, as I said at the beginning of this, they may not be the barrier that they appear to be up front. It may only take a lesser number of those positions to actually implement what you're trying to do. It isn't necessarily a match to your number of buildings, et cetera. But that's where the data comes in, right? That's where understanding your numbers of referrals, where they come from, what those data look like. I will say one of the pieces which is a little bit of both is that MTSS work, because it may require positions to make sure you implement well Tier 2 strategies. A lot of the Tier 1 work that you're going to do, though, is with classroom teachers and making sure they're comfortable and have the skills to meet the needs of most kids. I think we're ready for questions? Yes? Yeah. We're happy to take any questions on anything you saw in the report that we've missed in terms of the presentation, or anything that we've talked about that you'd like to ask.
I mean, not so much a question, but a statement, and it's more of a thank you for the brutal honesty of that report. Thank you to Dan and Mary and Christine and all the team's work in doing this. I mean, this is a great example of leaning in. I mean, I really appreciate the acknowledgement of, the budgetary constraints that the town has, but I see this as a beginning, and this is some really important work that we all have to get into. But seeing, a lot of the many of the gaps that we have in the report, and just being able to lean into it and knowing that the team is working on it really makes me feel good about the future of our special education programs and our regular education programs. So I really appreciate you folks coming and sharing that with us. And thank you, Dan and team, for bringing them on and taking this head on. This is brave, but it's what we need. We're leaning right into it, so thank you.
It is brave. If I can just say to that, we didn't mention this, it's mentioned in the report, but these reports are only as strong as the people we interview, the data we're given, those kinds of things, how complete it is. And the people that we had a chance to interview were as brutally honest as we've tried to be with you here tonight and in the report. And that's how you get good data in terms of basing future decisions on, when your people obviously care, and they do, and they're willing to come and meet with us and talk about what's working and what isn't, and they did that.
I'd like to echo what Gabe said. This is uncomfortable, but you need to get uncomfortable to take steps forward. And I'm glad that we're doing it because this involves our most at-risk students. Any way that we can support this, it's imperative that we do it. So thank you for this reality check. And I look forward to updates as this process commences and continues on. Thank you both.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, Bill and Cindy, thank you. I agree. I think getting outside thinkers like yourself to come in and take a look at it and give a very objective approach, I think is huge, and it's a great step that we made with this. I did have a question, and I was happy to see that there was some comments in here about out-of-district placements and trying to reduce that. But I picked up the number that you said before. We have 67 out-of-district placements currently right now. It was on like the first slide.
As of a particular date?
Yes, correct. So let's just use that number, right?
Okay.
So how does that, I know you threw out the number of like 150 in Belmont or something from years ago, but how does 67 compare to other districts that you've worked with? And also the IEP numbers. I'd like to hear where we stand with those.
Well, we were recently.
More than that.
More than that?
Yeah.
No, I'm trying to think. I was recently at a district where they were lower than that, but we certainly have been districts that have been higher than that. So I don't think there's any percentage that is considered typical.
Yep.
Sometimes out-of-district placements are just bad luck. I always tell the story that when I was an assistant director, I worked in a town that was on the Orange Line with a direct line to Children's Hospital. And when people would come to Massachusetts for medical treatment, they would live in housing in my district. And the first thing Children's Hospital would say to them is register in school. So, that was a matter of location. But again, as we said, sometimes it's a reflection that parents have no other choice. And so they do what they need to for their children. That's their job. Yeah.
The number doesn't feel, in terms of my experience in the districts we've worked with, as out of line.
Okay.
Right? But what you can't tell within a raw number is whether some of those students could have been served if there'd been the right kind of programming in place.
Sure.
Right? And so there is opportunity. We've tried to mention that here, where some opportunity might be. That's about space. That's about securing the right kind of people to teach in that program, possibly the right kinds of partnerships, those kinds of things. And that's more about, we had a sort of a saying in Brookline kids educated in Brookline whenever possible, right? And that was our goal. And that's what we set out to do, and that's why we built programming, because we wanted them there. Their parents wanted them there. Sure. So the number's one thing, and then you dig into the weeds of what the programming is and whether you could better provide it in your district.
Got it. And the same with the IEP number as well? Like there was no red flags on that? I mean, I look at it from a business standpoint, right?
I understand. So, one of the things special ed directors do is they look at what the state average is, and then they look at what other districts are.
Yeah.
One of these districts that I did the audit in, they're only at 15%. They have a tremendous commitment to inclusion. It is just, it's palpable. And that's what their commitment is. And so they're at 15%. And what happens is because their teachers are so well trained, students don't get referred. And then even students who have serious needs, they find a way to keep inside. Right. So it's many years of developing those programs. You have other districts, like I said, with the number is pushing 22-23% compared to the state average of 19. You begin to say, okay, what are the drivers here?
Yep.
Yeah, I just talked to one today, that's at 26, nearly 27. And some of it's about what that district looks like, what the changing nature of the demographics might be. But I think Cindy would agree with me that it tends to go back to how strong is that DCAP and its implementation? How strong is that MTSS system and its implementation? Because here's what we know. If those things are present, those numbers come down.
Right. Great. Thank you.
I want to really thank you. I'm a paraprofessional in the sub-separate classroom, so this is pretty much what I do every day. And the two districts I've worked in, one being where I work now is much larger, one being much smaller. You definitely need programs for children who, not that everybody's similar, but where everybody can find a place to work, find a place to fit. And the smaller district I worked in, I had one student until he was 22 because he was one of very few such a small district. But recognizing the inadequacies that might be in front of us, it takes somebody to come out from outside and let it be known that it's right there in our face and we need to find it. But it's imperative that across the board we're taking care of every child in this town. And I appreciate everything that you've done and the things that you've brought up. Thank you. Thank you.
So I've been here on the committee for 23 years, believe it or not. Far too long. Bill, you probably know that.
I don't know if I'd agree with it too long, but I know you've been here on this committee a long time. So.
Well, thank you. It's and it's always been a struggle trying to find how to deliver the services the best way that we can to every student who needs it. And I think you recognize, and we all probably do, that it's about, when you think about it, right, part of it is financial. It just is. All districts are getting, it seems like the needs are increasing every year. And the funding does not necessarily keep up with the needs. So, for example, district-wide, forgetting about even special education, 20 years ago, we weren't talking about students having real anxiety problems. In those days, it was all about this new thing on the autism scale, and that was where everybody's focus was. But over the years, the challenges that schools have been asked to deal with have simply increased. And when I say funding hasn't gone up, in Danvers, we've been very lucky. The last two budget cycles, the selectmen have, in the town meeting, and have given us the benefit of a lot of extra funding to try and work on dealing with, particularly with the in-district and out-district problem. And we can't thank them enough for what they've done so far. But the fact is, what you've laid out here is a perfect model, some of which does have financial impact. Every body that you hire costs some money. So, but what's the consequence of not doing that? It seems to me the consequence is that you end up being more reactive than proactive. The consequence of not having a real structure in terms of the number of the age you have and where you put them and how you put them leads to, I think, some situations inevitably where it's like, well, you have a parent who's really concerned about a particular student, how things are going, so why don't we try a one-on-one aid? It becomes a way to try and solve an individual problem rather than to have a structural solution and a process in place. At the same time, I don't think that that's what's the word I'm looking for? That's not a negative point to our administrators or to the persons helping to make those decisions, because they're dealing with real problems that are in front of them every day. So I think this is a terrific roadmap, and there are indeed some things we can simply do right away to address issues, and there are others where it's really going to take some structural planning. And one of the things to Dan, just it seems to me that Christina is going to be called upon to do a lot of data analysis and a lot of work on this. So to the extent that we recognize that and rely on her assistance to do some of the nuts and bolts day-to-day stuff, I think that's very important, especially if we don't want her to pass out on the job. So keep that in mind, I hope, as you go forward. A lot of courage it takes to have someone come in and tell you what you can do better and almost what you must do better. And I give you a lot of credit for it. We've seen this in other things that you have done through the years since you were here last year. You're not afraid to be transparent. You're not afraid to say, here's a problem, and I want to figure out how to solve this. And even if acknowledging the problem doesn't, isn't fun, isn't comfortable, you and your team are not afraid to do that. So I think that's a model of management and operation that will serve us well. So kudos to you for doing that. If I could, I just have a couple of specific questions. One thing that jumped out is under the regular education intervention and supports. And you talked about the reluctance of a staff to use the accommodations and supports in the DCAP, and that MTSS is underused. Can you talk a little bit more about that? It's in the report, we're being transparent, so let's chat about what we can do better there.
So without pulling up my notes.
I'm going to ask you to use the microphone a little more too.
So from being a superintendent, I'm going to speak on behalf of teachers. I'm going to take a teacher's position here right now. It is a little scary to make the decisions that are in a DCAP. A DCAP basically says, here are all the things you can do in your classroom without a child being on an IEP or a 504. And as the professional, you have the ability to make those decisions. Staff are often reluctant to do that independently because they don't want it coming back at them. And the things that you can think of, well, you let Johnny take extra time, you let Mary out of homework, why don't you let my child? Without saying, well, they're on a plan that allows it. So there's that concern. There's a concern that under evaluation and supervision, if an evaluator comes in and sees them doing something unusual, will that come back at them rather instead of being innovative and helpful for a child? So there's often a skittishness with teachers around the DCAP.
Let me mention one other. So I don't remember whether this is part of our interviews here, but in one of those districts that I mentioned earlier, it came up that the paperwork associated with the MTSS process was so cumbersome that people were shying away from it. It was easier to take other steps to get the kinds of supports they needed and to go through the DCAP process or the MTSS. There were some comments, I believe, a little bit about paperwork, but I don't remember it. That was another district that I was. So there are lots of reasons that may keep classroom teachers from utilizing those strategies as their primary focus.
Okay, so if I hear that correctly, what I'm hearing is that there are issues on, really they need both professional development probably and how it's used, why it's used and how to best use it. Yeah. And also a sense that if they run into some of the situations you talked about, difficulties with parents feeling students getting different, they need to know that the administration will be there to support them.
Absolutely.
100%.
They need to know that in terms of the evaluation and how they're looked at, that I see it in sort of the business I'm at. I've been in companies where you're always being caught doing something wrong versus doing something right. Mm. Then I have been in companies which sort of take the position that mistakes happen and we're going to support you when you make the mistake and give you the resources you need to do better if that's what it comes down to. But we're not out there to scare you. We're out there to help you. And not that we do any of this here in big measure, but I think those are valuable lessons for us to understand that to the extent that we need to improve the regular education services and the interventions, let's acknowledge and recognize what some of the roadblocks are, especially those soft roadblocks that we can work on. So I appreciate you being very forthright about that. I think, let's see. I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. The other, many of the recommendations, I think, fall into that category, looking at what's preventing us from doing what we need to do and doing it better, and then finding a way to move those blocks out of the way. So thank you very much, both of you, for your efforts and honesty in this report, and I think it's going to serve us well. So thank you.
May Chair, just as a wrap up, again, thank you, Cindy and Bill, for your thoroughness, and I always want to say thank you to all of our stakeholders that participated in this process. And there was a lot of, and we're glad that, I think you hit it on the head, is it's trust, right? And, I don't know necessarily if we're, brave or whatever for doing this. It's the right thing to do, because ultimately we need to ensure that everything we put forward, it's not saying that people are doing anything the wrong way or whatever, but there's always a way to look at it, reflect on our practices and to improve. And our staff works really hard. Our families, they deserve the best, our students do, and our staff, they deserve the best within our support of our administrators. So I think there's so many kernels of this through this part, and I just know that, again, there's been a lot of work done so far, and I look forward to bringing back updates and reports. And you're correct, Christine and her team, they've been diving into the data. Sometimes I feel like I don't see them for days because they're on, but that's so critical because you need a good baseline. And we've made progress, and we're so appreciative of the funding we received last year. Yes. And we've put a lot of time and work to build these programs, but we certainly appreciate, again, the work that Bill and Cindy, our administrative team, but also all the stakeholders that took the time to share and be very transparent. And we look forward to meeting again tomorrow with some of the stakeholders and, again, sharing this information with the community for more follow-up dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, every organization, I haven't seen an organization that doesn't have some of this. And one thing that stuck out was when you talked about a district that is really committed to the inclusion model. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is what DNA do you develop in your community, in your district? And if you can get everybody to buy into that mission, then you're going to get progress. Mm-hmm. It's what is important to everybody is what gets done. So right. Anyway, I'll be quiet now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to work with your team. Any chance I get to work with Dan Bauer, I appreciate. We really appreciate the opportunity to help out with this work. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next item for new business is review of mask resolutions. Does anyone have any questions or comments on the resolutions?
Yeah, nothing specific.
Nope. Okay, next item up, the superintendent recommends a first reading.
I'm sorry, just the program.
Mike? Oh, I skipped down. Okay, skipped ahead a little bit here. Item C, curriculum instruction, priorities, and assessment data. Mary Warner, sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to recognize Mary and the work of our administrators, and particularly our curriculum directors, if they could come up to assist with the presentation. We have Julie Pasternak, Hid Demaro serving a dual role as principal as well as curriculum director, as well as Ellen Ferrick at the middle school. We put together, actually, Mary and her team put together a very high-level presentation just of the updated MCAS results. And I want to stress the high-level piece because the greater depth will take place at the subcommittee meeting later this month, which much more detail. And again, we'll share the information as it comes out. But I think some things to point out with MCAS, as most of this presentation is revolving, and we know that the results in Danvers are mixed, and certainly, we know that some are above state average, some are at, some are a little below. And when we did a 7-year analysis of the data, we saw a similar pattern. And when we, dug deeper in terms of what's across the state in terms of state averages, it's the same. It fluctuates throughout the state. So again, it's important to note that the MCAS is not the only piece of data that we utilize. The local data is really critical because that's the one that you dig in on a more regular basis. But the MCAS is a data point that we utilize, and it actually is one that we're digging deep, and I can tell you the data teams have worked really hard. It does tie back to the previous presentation in terms of our Tier 1 interventions, and when we dig deep into what we're doing, because there are connections with that in terms of overall outcomes of learning. And we put together a number of initiatives last year to look at some areas to support our students, and we're continuing to build that for this year as well. So that work is currently happening. So the presentation is a very high level for this round. It's in your folder, and there'll be much deeper dive into the data at the subcommittee meeting. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Mary and the curriculum director team.
Great, thanks. All right, so to start the presentation, I thought what we'd do is give you a brief view of how the state trends went, because it gives us context for looking at the rest of the MCAS data. So in ELA, the results showed at the state level lower achievement in all grades, and it was an area of focus really for the Department of Education, is really looking at the literacy and working on improving that. And the math results show improved achievement in third grade, and then the rest are kind of flat results. And in science, they showed improved achievement in grades 5 and 10 with lower achievement in grade 8. And we're going to find that Danvers has a little bit different data than that, and we'll share that with you. So go to the next slide. So we're going to go subject by subject. So we'll start ELA, go to math, go to science. So we'll start with ELA. So we created a slide just to show us against the state. We're the blue, the state is the red, and how we did in ELA. From grades 3 all the way through 10. So what's interesting is that, at the elementary level, we was a little bit challenged with the ELA test, grades 3, 4, and 5. But then when you hit grades 6 through 10, we stayed right there with the state average. So I'm going to ask Julie Pasternak to come up now and kind of give us a little view of what's going on in the elementary. I think you remember from past presentations, we've changed a little bit of our programming. So last year we brought on a new phonics program, 95% phonics, which is our foundational skills program that was in place last year, but we were piloting our knowledge-based curriculum, or the comprehension end of the curriculum. So Julie will talk more about it, and I think we're going to share some of the local data that you were presented last June to give you context for the same group of students that this MCAS test assessed. Next slide.
Okay, so thank you, Mary. I want to preface this by, yes, our MCAS scores in 3, 4, and 5 are slightly below the state average. But what I wanted to really show you was that our local data, I think you remember me talking before that in order to have strong reading comprehension, I need to be able to decode or read the words in front of me, but I also need to have strong background knowledge, vocabulary, and experience with complex text. Our focus last year was truly around that word reading, that word decoding with a new phonics program in K through 5, and we worked on our MTS system as well. And I wanted to show this because this does show our gains, especially in K3, going from 55% of our K3 students meeting benchmark on foundational skills to 73.25 when we left in June. Now, why does this not translate exactly to MCAS? MCAS is a completely different assessment. So these numbers are testing our foundational skills, our ability to actually decode the words in front of us. Without this, we will never access MCAS. But the layer that we need, MCAS is complex grade level text that I need to be able to read, make sense of, and then respond to in writing. That is a different set of skills, a higher level set of skills than I need to be able to decode, but I also need to do that. As Mary stated, last year we were in the process of piloting different programs. We're very excited that this year we have full language comprehension plan in place for the entire year. The principals and I have seen it in action, K through 5 across the buildings. All of our students have access to complex grade level text. This is very high level text. It's purposely grade levels ahead of where students can actually decode on their own, so that students are operating, thinking through the vocabulary. They're having explicit vocabulary instruction. They're learning background knowledge, vocabulary. All of that is going to lead to stronger reading comprehension. So I think all of us, I speak for all of us, I'm looking over there, that we're committed to, we knew we needed to put these layers in place, and we purposely chose to start with word recognition and those foundational skills. And this year we're layering on that complex grade level text. So as we continue to learn and implement, it's the combination of those two coming together that is eventually going to lead to stronger MCAS scores. That work is beginning in pre-K, K1 and 2, and we're excited to see that translation into our MCAS scores going forward.
Great. All right, and then this slide here is we're showing some of our subgroup data. Now, when we get to our subcommittee meeting later this month, we will be going more into the demographic data and how our different subgroups performed. But on this slide, we're just highlighting the students that are non-high need students. So Massachusetts created a subgroup called high needs, and it's the aggregation of students with disabilities, students that are considered low income, and students that are English language learners. So they put those three subgroups together and give you a picture to how those kids are doing in accessing your curriculum. In this slide, we're looking at the students that are considered not high needs. So you'll see the red again is the state and blue is Danvers. And we started out trending with the state at the 65%, but then as the 23 and 24 have come, we're starting to decline a bit in ELA. The gap was larger in 23. We've closed it in 24 only because the state average came down as well. So the gap closed just from a decrease. So similarly, though, the high needs group actually tracked exactly with the state. So the state average for high needs kids is exactly where the Danvers high needs kids are. And so if this line was on the graph, it would be one on top of the other. So it was a little bit different, whereas our non-high needs kind of were coming down a little bit in their achievement there. So that was the ELA presentation. Just a quick note that at the middle school level, although at the state average, we are also piloting new ELA materials. So they have, by the end of this year, they will have selected a new ELA program to go with, but we're in the process of using only 2 programs, Fish Tank and EL. So they're working on that. So moving over to the math data. So we get our fancy slide again, grades 3 through 10 in math. And now what's interesting is elementary, the strength in mathematics. And it's really, as you can see, grade 4 math is like one of our, our bright spots for our MCAS data, how much that is above the state average. And then grades 6, 7, 8, and 10 are now below the state average, and have that challenges there in math. So we're going to bring them up in a minute, but I don't know if Julie wants to just quickly say like what, I think you had a little bit to say, a sentence to say around that. Okay, all right, so let's bring up the secondary curriculum directors to talk further about it. Actually, we're going to bring Ellen up. I'm going to do a slide, and then Peter will come up to finish up.
Good evening. So clearly, as you can see, we are below the state average at grades 6, 7, and 8, most significantly at grade 6. So we recently held data analysis meetings with each group of grade level teachers where we analyzed the data, and some of our major findings are that even though we're not really getting into the disaggregated data, it ties in so much to the conversation that we just had a few moments ago. Our non-disabled students are meeting or exceeding expectations at a much higher rate than our students with disabilities. And one of our hypotheses is that we're not letting all students, especially our students with disabilities, but really all students grapple with difficult problems enough. That the ways in which we are trying to scaffold and modify for students with challenges is by kind of taking away the rigor as opposed to scaffolding them up to challenging problems. So that's something that we are examining in the weeks to come, that we're looking at the level of rigor in our local assessments. We are analyzing them to see if they match the rigor of the MCAS test. And in the coming months, we're also working to ensure that we're scaffolding work appropriately for students and not removing the challenge in the name of student support. Another finding that concerns us is the low percentage of students in the exceeds category in mathematics. That was something that we found in grades 6, 7, and 8 that When we say meets and exceeds, we're really in that meets category, and very few students are exceeding expectations, which was really surprising to our teachers who see the great work that their students are doing. So again, we're looking at the rigor of our local assessments, as well as curriculum alignment, specifically with the 8th grade algebra class, that when students accelerate into algebra, they're really completing 3 years of mathematics in 2 years of school. And so we're looking to see if our sequence there is perhaps dropping some key 8th grade concepts in that tight acceleration timeline, that kids aren't maybe getting access to all of the essential 8th grade mathematics concepts in the kind of name of trying to get them through algebra by the end of 8th grade.
And then just one quick thing I wanted to say about 8th grade math, although that we're below the state average, they did make gains from 2023 over to 2024, so they made quite a few percentage point gains in that year.
I do have a question, because it seems to correlate with like the exodus from 5th grade into middle school. I mean, is it also a symptom of the most talented students are leaving the district, which kind of flips the population? Or like it's kind of hard to get my head around where elementary school is exceeding and then it drops so significantly in middle school. I don't know if it's a population thing, or is the curriculum that is there like that wide of a misalignment?
We don't know. Those are all things that we're investigating. I mean, we certainly do lose some students from 5th to 6th. One thing that Principal Colantoni and I have talked a lot about is just the sheer number of minutes of mathematics instruction that students receive in elementary school, and how drastically that decreases when we get to middle school. Is it 90 minutes daily? No. 70 minutes daily at elementary school, and then plus ST math time. And when they get to middle school, it's 53 minutes, but not every day because of the way our schedule drops. So it's 53 minutes, 6 out of 7 school days. So that's just sheer mathematically, minute-wise, it's a huge decrease in instructional time. So that's something that really concerns us.
6th grade math is the first year or two that you start to think algebraically. So you switch over from like the arithmetic and the additive way of thinking about mathematics to a multiplicative place. So it's like a definite concept too. But again, we should be trending with the state and doing better.
Yeah, I would just, it's in terms of the math piece, yes, it changes in middle school for us, but it also changes in middle school, or seems to, for the state. It's you could almost lay those lines, except for the actual numbers, elementary school, middle school, then kind of back up once they hit high school. And so one wonders whether it's a developmental thing of that particular age group. You know, there could be a lot of different reasons that might lead to that, but the fact that it's not just a Danvers issue suggests to me that there's something bigger going on in terms of that population, educationally, psychologically, sociologically. It's something bigger than that, and kids learn at different rates at different times in their life. So not to be ignored, but I hope the state, you know, on our level, certainly we don't want to ignore the results, but I hope the state is looking at that and saying, why does this happen on a statewide level?
Good. And before we get to the high school results, I just wanted to share with you also the other slide that shows the non-high needs group, that how we did in math. We, as a district, again, this is grades 3 through 8, we're tracking with the state, and then there was a slight, a slight decline in Danvers from the state average in 2024. All right, so again, we're going to be diving deeper into the subgroup data when we get to the subcommittee. So I would like to call Peter up and talk about the high school. Oh, you're going the wrong way. There you go.
Thank you. So in addition to looking at the state comparison, we also find it helpful to look at specific cohort data from when they took the assessment in grade 8 versus when they took it in grade 10. So when we look at student growth percentile from 8th grade to 10th grade, we do see that our class last year went from 37% to 57% in ELA, and then in mathematics, 27% to 42%. So a SGP of 40 to 60 demonstrates average growth, which this class did demonstrate. And then to mirror a lot of what Ellen was saying in terms of both professional learning, we at the high school have offered several professional development opportunities for teachers to participate in standards-based classroom practices. So this really involves looking closely at the state standards for their class, making sure that we are aligning our instruction and assessments to the rigor of the standards, and digging deep into the items that students are not performing well on. To speak a little bit specifically to math, a lot of takeaways came from last year's math item analysis. This year we piloted an algebra review for students to take that were recommended to take concurrently with geometry. We identified that a lot of our lowest performing standards last year were the algebra standards, and that may be because they're a year removed from taking it. So our hope is that this year some of those students taking geometry along with that algebra review will sort of fill in those gaps that may still be there. Additionally, with ELA, we had a lot of great conversations after our data analysis last year, especially between our ELA department and social studies department, and how they can work interdisciplinarily to support standards that are taught across domains. So part of our work this year is both to look at what language we're using to make sure we're calibrating around that language, so students know when they're working on one skill in one set of classes, it's that same skill in another set of classes, and it's not a separate, just discrete thing that they're working on. And we're also continuing to tighten up what local data we can get to make sure we're all calibrated around that as well. And then in addition, the last thing I wanted to speak upon is we do have other outcomes we can look at in terms of achievement data other than the MCAS. So we wanted to share a little bit about our AP data from this past year. I did want to point out that 2020 was a little bit of an anomaly. Since we left early, that AP exam was converted to fully online in a shortened test. So you may notice that sticks out a little differently. But I'm very proud of our growth from 2021 through 2024. We had 68% of students that took the exam in the spring of 2024 get a score of 3 or higher, which is a passing grade. I'm also very proud of our continued commitment to allowing access for students in AP classes. Almost a quarter of our students take at least one AP course every year, so that represents 213 students, which is 494 exams, so that's student taking multiple classes. And due to our participation and achievement, we have received the honor of being on the AP 2024 School Honor Roll, so we're very proud of that distinction as well. And I think this is just another example how we're showing that our students are demonstrating success, not just in this one metric.
Okay, yep, we're on to the next one. So finally, to wrap up our MCAS presentation, we're going to just quickly show you the science MCAS data. Again, science only happens once in each level of schooling that kids go through, elementary, middle, and high school. So we've given 5, 8, and 10. So at 5th grade, we're trending a little bit below, we're trending below the state average, although in 5th grade, we held the same average as we had in 2023. So we're working on that. Again, we've been focusing a lot on the ELA curriculum, and I think that even with the knowledge-based curriculum in place, I think we might see some gains as well in science, given the background knowledge that they're going to be getting in addition to their science curriculum. In grade 8 and 10, we're above the state average, so we were pleased to see that. And the science department is also looking into making a transition next year to a different type of MCAS assessment. They're going to be doing performance-based or simulation-based questions on their tests. So they are looking at their curriculum and looking at how they're assessing kids so that they're able to access that test this coming school year. And then finally, the DHS biology tests, the students are doing well, and we have success, a good rate of success of our students passing that, and then also be getting the competency determination needed to graduate. So that's all our high-level, broad, aggregate MCAS data. And then again, when we get to the subcommittee meetings, we'll dive deeper into disaggregate data. But also along with the MCAS comes this accountability ratings that the Department of Ed needs to put together. Now, they are mandated by federal and state law to have this accountability system, and it is a complex system. It's like a points-based system, but you gather your improvement on each of these categories, as you see up here. You're graded on your achievement, your student growth. At the high school, they have more measures to deal with than the 3 through 8, but the high school completion. Progress towards English proficiency. So they measure our L's and see how they're doing on the access test each year and seeing how their progress. They set learning targets for each of our L's and measure how we do towards improving their achievement on the access test. Chronic absenteeism across the schools. And then finally, advanced coursework at the high school. So the percentage of 11th and 12th graders taking advanced coursework. We're fortunate in this area that we do have a lot of the APs, as Peter's pointed out, but we also have courses called Project Lead the Way and these applied learning classes that are counting towards that advanced coursework. So we're a little bit ahead of some of the school districts using those curriculums. So the accountability, there's two measures that you get in your accountability report. It's how you're doing improving. They're looking for us to improve ourselves each year, and that you are on a course to keep improving, and that you're increasing your, doing better in your MCAS and in other measures. And then they also give you an achievement percentile. So what I did was I captured 23 and 24 in each of these areas. The top one is on how we're doing on our progress towards improvement, and then the bottom one is what our achievement percentiles were by each school. So as you can see, we're continuing to make moderate or substantial progress, so that's a good sign in each of our schools. And then our achievement percentiles, we have a range of them in our district, but we're continuing to try to keep an eye on that. So next steps is our, as I keep saying, is a subcommittee meeting, and we will have more detail by looking at disaggregate data. Then we'll also report on what we're seeing in our curriculum trends when we've been analyzing that. We've met with, at the Holton Richmond, we've met with each grade level and each discipline, so we have a lot of trends there. Peter's been working with the high school level on their data analysis, and coming up this at the faculty meeting and at the October early release at the elementary level, they looked at the data. So we'll give you a report on that, and then we'll give you some further information on the accountability results. That's it.
Mr. Shannon?
Through the chair to the presenters, thank you very much for your presentation. Great hearing. Where we need to do some work and where we're doing well. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a career educator. I have a certain way I feel about MCAS, and I won't elaborate because it'll take all night. But I did a little analysis of my own, and instead of doing it by grade level, I broke it out by school. Don't get nervous. I just like to identify some positives, and I really appreciate you talking about driving literacy. That's foundational. Improving rigor, I agree. We had a lengthy conversation about the issues in special education. All these things over time will have a positive impact. But I'm seeing things that I think are very positive, coming out of the pandemic. At Highlands, grade 4 math, stepped up by 12 points from last year to this year. What's happening in 4th grade there? We need to identify that and share that. Great Oak ELA jumped up 20 points over the last 3 years. Math is up at 84%. And I'm sorry, I should have told you. I just looked at exceeds or meets expectations. Riverside in grade 3, ELA is up from 36 to 45%. Math went from 26 to 41. Grade 5 went from 39 to 53% the last 2 years. They stayed flat there. Smith, math went from 31 in 22 to 61%, exceeds and meets. Grade 5 math went from 40 to 61. My point, and I can't leave the Thorpe out, because I'm a Thorpe parent. Grade 3 math, over 60%. Grade 4 math went from 31 to 65. I have to do grade 5 because my kids all had Mrs. Horn. Went from 40 to 63. And in science, and by the way, I have an issue with science because for those that don't know, the science test covers material from grades 2 to 5. So talking to a 2nd or a 3rd grader about science versus the test in 5th grade, it's a very different animal. Went from 30% in 22 to 61 and 63%. So I bring this up for one reason. I know the movement was to go to self-contained classrooms in these buildings, and that model is on you. I support whatever decision's being made. I know the research really doesn't sway either way. It's what works for Danvers, and there's a lot of issues around scheduling and what have you. But these people can't work in silos when we have successes like this. They have to be shared best practices within a building and across a district. Because, you know, even older teachers like me, you can learn new tricks. Everybody can help each other on. It's that collaboration, no matter whether you're in the self-contained or departmentalized model, I'd really like to see continue to be shared. Because if we're going by data and it's driving our decisions, there are good things happening in all those buildings. So, thank you.
Through the chair, if good. So thank you. I always enjoy these presentations. I think it's really good, and it's data points, and through seeing several of these over the past few years, I understand it is one data point, and there's other great data that comes out, and you know, we show how kids are benchmarked, and you know, throughout the year, it's great. One of the questions that I did have on this is, I know we start to level kids by ability in high school, right? Accelerated and AP and things like that. Have we ever looked to do things like that in the middle school?
It does happen. I mean, the algebra that I referred to, that is a form of leveling. That's really the only leveling that we do at the middle school level. Most research points against leveling at middle school. Students, you know, developmentally, middle schoolers are all over the place, and it's generally seen as kind of early to sort of determine a track that a student should be placed on. So it's not really a conversation that we've had recently.
The reason I bring it up,
it's a great question.
I just see, you know, it's like, you know, I know all the great things that are going on at the middle school, and then it's kind of disheartening to see the year after year. And I understand the kids at that age are really, it's challenging. I have ones that are in middle school and high school, and I totally get it. But I just see, if we're going through the same thing over and over, maybe there's just like some other tweaks that we can do to try to. And again, I'm out over my skis on this. I have no background in education or research or anything like that. Just wonder if there's other things that we can think outside the box on.
Yeah, I think if anything, we're really looking to have sort of more heterogeneous classes and more inclusion. Somebody brought up actually the point, so for many years at the middle school, we've had full inclusion in science and social studies really forever, whereas we've had small group or self-contained classes in math and English. And at our faculty meeting last week, somebody pointed out, you know, our strongest results are in science, the class or the subject that's had the most robust inclusion over the years. So I thought that was an interesting observation that came from, I think, a social studies teacher, you know, somebody with not really skin in the game, so to speak. So that's a conversation that we're having a lot, but yes, leave no stone unturned, for sure.
Great,
yeah, thank you.
So first of all, thank you for all the work you're doing, and I think we will see improvement over time. We're sort of at the beginning of a new day here with a new superintendent and new staff members, new principals, mostly. And at the same time, someone like Julie, who's been here a long time and shown such dedication, continues to be an excellent leader for where we need to go. And every time you speak with us, your passion shows, Julie, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate that from all of you. MCAS. So I think MCAS is, let's look at it for what it is good at, okay? It can give us a sense of where students are on a continuum to what the state thinks they should be learning at a particular point in time. It helps us figure out where we can be, where we can focus educational efforts to get students to that point that the state says they should be at. So it's basically a good diagnostic tool if it's used that way. I do think it has caused some, over now 20 years, more focused teaching, more focused education. I think we've all become a little more pointed and professional over 20 years of saying, okay, let's learn how to analyze data and to use it, all of which is good. What it doesn't do very well is recognize that students don't all develop at the same rate, or even that some students have talents in one area and are not very talented in another area, and that's okay. I mean, I get it, it's supposed to be sort of a minimum competency test. But it shouldn't be everything. And one of the things I think is that as a state, as a country, we love things to be simple and measurable, and we've really gotten lousy at nuance. And so if you can take one measure and look at the Boston Globe and say, oh, our district was number 20 this year, and another district is number 30, and by the way, the district that's number 15 is right next door, and how come we're not doing as well as they are? All of those are probably not helpful analyses. You know, it's like the Boston Globe or the Boston Magazine list of the best high schools. I don't really know what that tells you other than they're pretty simple measurements. So I think we keep working, keep grinding it out. Congratulations on the progress you're making. Stick with it. Do the right things. Hopefully some of what we saw in the special education presentation in terms of what we need to do on regular education is going to help us get there too. So it's got to be a holistic approach. And keep doing what you're doing, and we'll get better over time, which is what we can hope to do. But the big thing is, let's do the best we can for our students. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but thank you all for your presentations. I really love the comparisons of like the in-district progress. I love taking a look at, you know, what the non-high need students are doing and how that compares to the state, because it, as opposed to giving an average representation of what Danvers is, we're taking a look at, you know, what's working and where we can focus. And if you think about some of our non-high need scores and the earlier presentation today on special education, it correlates. It's like that's where we want to focus to elevate everyone else. So I really, really appreciate that detail in the presentation. What I really was happy to see, and for me this is a leading indicator, it's the grades K through 5 reading data. You know, to see students jump, you know, from K to 3 of 55% in September to 73% in June, and then grades 4 to 5 to go from 66% to 90% at the end of the year. I mean, for me, you know, the whole function of education, right, it's comprehension, and that applies to math as well. If they have strong reading comprehension in elementary school, they'll carry that through and be able to perform better as overall students. So I'm super, super happy about that. I know we're going to go into more granular detail in the policy meeting, the curriculum meeting, I'm sorry. One thing I would really, really love to know, and I brought it up earlier, is, you know, 50% of the students are leaving from elementary school. What do those students look like that are leaving? And is that having an impact on our scoring as well? And I don't mean to, I don't want to dwell on the score. I mean, I know it's, you know, that age frame, that, you know, 6th to 8th grade is tough. It was the toughest, you know, time in my academic years. But it has to have an impact. They're leaving, you know, and it's not so much why are they leaving, but which students are leaving and what does that leave us with? And I think that also plays into some decision making. And last thing I'll say is, as a parent, I mean, my kids still love ST math, and you see like they come home with all this ST math stuff and they're competing with their friends, and you see the scores, and it's like, how do we apply, you know, I don't know if you can do that in middle school. I don't know if that's possible, but there's definitely a passion that I've never seen elementary school kids have with ST math ever in my lifetime, not even with me. And it's like, how can we take that and turn it into something else? Because I hear it all the time. You know, the kids are playing basketball. It's like, oh, I beat you. Well, I'm better than you at ST math. And it's like, whoa. So, no, but thank you. Thank you for what you guys do. And great presentation. I'm really looking forward to digging into the data.
To the chair, if you don't mind,
Yep,
I
sure.
know we've gone over a lot of time, but I just, again, want to echo the sentiments. Thank you for all the work. And again, and I appreciate what you're saying, Mike, right? It's sharing best practices. And I heard it earlier in the presentation, you know, and I sat in that room when the data was being discussed before it was publicly released. And, you know, our teachers were surprised. And, you know, again, this is not an indictment on effort and what, it's just looking at where we're at to how can we keep moving. So, and that's incumbent on me to look at structures and such. Are we allowing the time that's necessary for this work to take place and share these, and I know they're working really hard at that. But to answer the other piece of transition, you know, looking at the data, that's critical, and I know already at the middle school, the implementation of the WIN block for grade 6 as a pilot is adding that layer of structure and support at grade 6, because there is that understanding that there is, you know, a separation there, right? So that is in place, and that's being worked on, which is a lot of credit to the middle school team and that's a lot to put into place in 1 year. The other part too is when I talked about vertical alignment, that's critical, right? So that means bringing the high school, middle school, and elementary together to work on those pieces, so when the 5th grade leave to go to the 6th grade, you know, you want to understand like where may there be potential gaps. You know, again, it's not working harder, it's just being able to really look at the situation. So that is something that is really important. And then the last piece is it comes down to, are our students prepared to be successful when they walk out the doors as seniors? That's the key. And studies show that if a student takes one advanced placement or one advanced course, the trajectory changes a great deal. So I think the high school, they've taken a lot of the, because AP data can be manipulated. And some districts really are very stringent in terms of, you know, how do you get into an AP class? Danvers High, they've really dropped that to allow more participation. So the fact of the greater participation is going to be a greater payoff for all students. And I think at the end of the day, you know, our students do well when they walk out, and they do have great opportunities, and we'll talk more about that piece, because I think that's the bottom line of all this. These are all data points, but it's connected from pre-K to 12, and really bringing that into alignment. So it's exciting work. I'll get off the soapbox, but again, thank you for everybody's hard work. And our administrators are working really hard on this too. When I check in with them and work on it, and the piece of special education, Christina team, it's coming together, but we got a lot of work, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we're going to skip down to the second letter D. Superintendent recommends a first reading of updated DPS policy, JIE, and rescinding existing policy.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
All right, any discussion?
It was brought to our attention by our council that with change in Title IX regulations, that the notification for policy JIE pregnant students needs to be changed as soon as possible, because the new regulations state that a recipient must not require a student who's pregnant or has related conditions to provide certification from a healthcare provider or any other person that the student is physically able to participate in the recipient's class program or extracurricular activities. So the updated version that I've shared in the folder is that the policy as it should read with the adjustment. So it's very simple, cut and dry. So I wanted to bring that. That's why that didn't make the policy. That was brought to my attention after the policy subcommittee, but it's something that we need to bring for a first reading. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
None? Okay. All those in favor of the first reading of the DPS policy JIE and rescinding existing policy? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none. Motion carries. Item E, the superintendent recommends a first reading of updated Danvers Public School policy ADD, school safety.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Oh, you're supposed to.
So moved.
Apologies.
No problem. Discussion.
Thank you, sir. This recommends, because we're working with our school threat assessment team, and we really dug into this policy. The wording change is really under Section C, school personnel action. And there's really not a substantial change except just some wording in terms of areas that would, revisions that would match updated procedures and protocols. As you may note that this policy itself was approved in 2016 or updated. So that's quite a bit of time to 2024. So the wording itself, although in terms of the overall policy, it's not a huge substantive change, it does match what's applicable for today in terms of really looking at our district threat assessment team. Our protocols for that should be separate of the policy. The umbrella policy gives us coverage for school safety. So the recommendation is to approve the adjustments with the wording, particularly under Section C, which I put into your folder.
Okay, all those in favor?
Well, quick question, I'm sorry.
Throw it right in.
Dan, do any of these, I noticed it talks about, under paragraph C, these procedures relate to school personnel, students, visitors to a school, school event, who make any verbal or written threat or threatening graphic / video or gesture against members of the school community? Does that impact out-of-school conduct at all, or is that only things that happen in school?
So ultimately.
Or at a school event?
Yes, I can certainly answer that. So as most matters tend to come into school in some capacity, it's always a responsibility to handle that. So, we're not looking to extend our reach, but when these items cross over to school safety, it is incumbent on us to act.
Good, good. That's a good thing, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No worries. Any other comments? Okay, all those in favor of approving the first reading of the updated DPS policy, ADD?
Aye.
Opposed, none, the motion carries. Okay, on to order of business, consent agenda. Motion to approve the fundraising requests, field trip requests, and personnel memo.
So moved.
Any comment? All those in favor? Opposed, none, motion carries. Okay, Mr. Secretary.
I move to approve and release the minutes of the September 9th, 2024 regular meeting, and to approve but not release the minutes from the September 9th, 2024 executive session.
Second. Oh, so moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, motion carries. All right, on to communications, is there anything from legislation? Okay, nothing. Do we have any updates from subcommittees?
Chair, if you, to the chair, please. Yep. Danvers Cares, I know that, Mike, you're going to be the liaison with that, but just to give an update, they met today. We have a revised, welcome to that. They changed the leadership structure of that, and again, and Dave Thompson did a great job running Danvers Cares the last few years, but we shifted that. Really, it's a huge job to 3 of our high school staff, social workers, and they're dividing the responsibilities. But more students were there at the meeting today because there are connections with the schools in terms of Holton Richmond and the high schoolers, groups of students that do work with Danvers Cares, so they spoke today. So the overall meeting was a very positive piece, so I just wanted to pass that on. The other piece for the consortium, the NEC, is that we have an upcoming meeting, but really, the last meeting was a few weeks ago, and really, the budget is doing well. The HVAC project is online. They had a few difficulties and hiccups in the summer, but they're moving along just fine with that. So, and the transportation piece is something that's being worked on closely. Remember, we've entered into an agreement with the schools to look for ways we can streamline out-of-district transportation. So this is the fact gathering here. We've submitted information, so we're looking for more. As a side note, our superintendent's roundtable, it's 16 communities were part of a roundtable, and we have a special education meeting next week just to review and look at programs with other districts to see if we can streamline and partner together. So I'll provide an update after we attend the meeting, and Christina Ryan's going to attend the meeting with me. That's all I have in terms of these specific areas.
All right. Any other updates? Okay. A motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Any discussion, final comments? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, none? Good night, Danvers. Thank you for coming.